Hi friends, welcome to Sevilla Storytime. Today we're going to be looking at the story of Henry Peleuve, who was a real-life James Bond type of hero who died here in Sevilla and is buried in the English cemetery. This was a life completely out of the ordinary and we are about to find out why. So let's dig in. If you've seen any of my previous videos, then you will know that I am always talking about, that sounds really bad, I'm always talking about dead people, but it's kind of true. I love history, and a lot of history revolves around the lives of people who have already passed. And here in Sevilla, I do have a bit of a fixation with cemeteries as well, it has to be said. Basically, in the English cemetery here in Sevilla, I discovered whilst I was investigating and exploring the cemetery that we actually have our very own British World War II spy war hero buried here. At the English cemetery in Sevilla, there's a group of people that take care of the cemetery, and they're called the Angels of the City, Los Ángeles de la Ciudad. They're a group of volunteers, people that get together, and one of the things that they do is restore, well, not so much restore as look after the tombs in the English cemetery. You know, as the name suggests, they're the angels, they're the guardians of the cemetery. And as they were going about their business looking after the cemetery, they noticed that one of the tombstones was kind of hidden amongst all of the brambles and the bushes, you know, very overgrown. When they kind of took away all of the greenery that was covering up this tombstone, they discovered some interesting information. So the headstone itself bore an identity, an acronym, and some initials. So it said Major HLT Peleuve OSCMC, and that indicated that the person who was buried had actually been honoured during World War II. Those titles meant that he was Chevalier of the Legion of Honour, the Croix de Guerre, so the War Cross, and the Medal of the Resistance. Okay, so this wasn't just any old tomb, this was somebody that was pretty solid and important. So this got people thinking, well, who was this man? Who was this person who's buried here? We know nothing about him, and people started to investigate. Well, let me tell you, this man, if you think that James Bond didn't exist, you'd be right. But the closest thing that I've ever heard of James Bond was this guy. Brace yourselves. The tomb was the tomb of Harry Peleuve. He was a military leader. He was part of the British Special Operations Command in France. So basically he was a spy. He was deported to Buchenwald, which was a Nazi extermination camp, and he came out alive. He died in Sevilla at the age of 47 on March the 13th, 1963, which is why he's buried here in Sevilla. Henri Leonard Thomas Peleuve was born to British parents, Leonard Otto and Eva. He was born in Hastings on the coast of Sussex. Even though he was born in the UK, he changed his address several times as he was growing up. So he moved from the United Kingdom to Algeria to the coast of Brittany, and he spent time within France, which he later began to consider to be his adoptive home. So even though he was born in Britain, he kind of considered himself to be French. He was very talented at languages. He could speak obviously English and French, but he also added Spanish. He's added Spanish to his list of languages, which is also obviously very useful if you're into espionage and all of that. He was a very clever man. He graduated as an electrical engineer, and once he'd graduated, he went on to work for television companies, including the BBC. This knowledge of communications would be one of the strengths that helped him throughout his career as a spy. He worked at the BBC headquarters at Alexandra Palace before World War II, but once the war broke out, he wanted to defend his country, and so he signed up and he enlisted in a battalion of the Royal Artillery. During the Nazi invasion of northern and central France, he was sent there to fight, and he did it very passionately. He had to withdraw from battle as Hitler's troops completely conquered French soil. So this just made Harry all the more determined to fight for his country, for the land that he loved, and that means both Britain and France. And he managed to specialise in camouflaged radars, and he joined a secret command of the Special Forces, so the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. He went out to France, and he went there to encourage the French resistance against the Nazis. As he was working for the Special Forces, he changed his identity, so he wasn't known as Harry Peleuve, he was known as Henri Chevalier. Apologies to any French people. He was heavily involved in numerous acts of sabotage in the Bordeaux area. He was involved in so many acts of espionage that they are countless, but one thing is for sure is that the Nazis became very aware of his presence and of his talent in undermining their operations. But he was fearless. He wasn't put off by the fact that the Nazis were onto him, that they knew who he was. He had balls of steel, let's be real. He returned to the British military headquarters in Baker Street in London, so that's what I'm saying, he's very James Bond, this guy. The British kept sending him back to France because they recognised that he was a very valuable part of the espionage operations. So he parachuted into France various times, and on one occasion, as he was parachuting into Nîmes in France, he actually broke his leg. So that's dedication for you. While he broke his leg, that kind of put him out of action for a while, but it didn't put him out of action forever. He reappeared in Cannes, and he helped the Carte resistance network led by André Girard. But as I said, the Nazis were onto him and they were looking for him. So the Nazis managed to find the Carte headquarters and the collaborators, but Harry Peleuve managed to escape. So he knew they were onto him, and with his broken leg, he managed to escape from the Nazis, limping, literally limping to get away from the Nazis, with nothing on him except the clothes on his back. He had nothing except him, his clothes, and his broken, limping leg. In spite of his broken leg, he managed to escape all the way to the Franco-Spanish border, so the border that's between France and Spain, and he crossed over the border and he was put into hospital in Saragossa. So he was able to get to the British embassy. Remember, all the while he's being pursued by the Nazis who just want to do away with him. So he manages to get safe conduct by changing vehicles. He has collaborators that are helping him, secretly putting him into one vehicle after another to get him out of the country. He manages to eventually fly back to London. When he's in London, he receives training as an elite secret agent. This is where he gets his real James Bond shiz going on. So he's trained up as an elite special agent because he's known to be very good as well at disguising his identity and literally dressing in disguises to hide who he is. So it's not just a name, he literally dresses up and is capable of completely disappearing, which is obviously a very attractive prospect for the Brits who need someone just like this. Once again, Harry goes back to France under the code name of Arthur. He's sent into deep France and he's encouraging groups of Maquis with guerrilla tactics. One of his most dedicated agents that he's in charge of is actually a famous author, a famous novelist named André Malraux. He's coordinating 4,000 resistance fighters at this point, and he's coordinating them all in the southern region of France. So this is a real army of patriots. It's not just British people though. There's also Spanish people collaborating with this group and Polish expatriates, understandably, who want to get the Nazis out. So under the direction of Harry Peleuve, this group of patriots manages to totally undermine and sabotage countless strategic points that Nazis had within France. So they are doing fantastic work to really stick it in the eye for the Nazis. I mean, just for that alone, I'm like, hats off to you, Harry. Hooray, Harry. Unfortunately, things take a little bit of a turn for the worst. You know, we've got the Nazis looking for Harry, and he's doing an absolutely sterling job, let's be real. But the Nazis, being the Nazis, they're just there to dare por culo. The Nazis actually managed to find Harry Peleuve on March the 21st, 1944. The Gestapo enter into a safe house where Harry was, where they'd been spying on him, and they take him out and arrest him. Harry, by this point, was now Captain Peleuve, and he was heavily interrogated by the Gestapo. I mean, can you imagine anything worse? It's literally the stuff of nightmares. We have ways of making your talk. He was interrogated by the SS Counterintelligence Service in Paris, where they had their headquarters. You know, this wasn't just an interview. This wasn't just a case of, so tell us, Harry, what have you been up to? No, of course not. This was the bloody Gestapo we're talking about. They tortured him. This guy was tortured. Do you know what tortured means? Do you know what that means? No, you don't, and I'm very happy for you, and I hope I never know what it means either. But Harry here was tortured, but undefeated. So there were various other resistance leaders, and basically the Nazis wanted Harry to grass up on them and reveal the names of those people. Harry was not that kind of a guy, and he was not going to crumble. Oh no. This is Hooray Harry we're talking about. So Harry did not reveal anything about his comrades. He kept his lips sealed. But the torture itself did unfortunately have an adverse effect on Harry, which possibly contributed to his untimely death. The Nazis did transfer him to a prison, to Fresne, I don't know how you pronounce this. He was placed in prison and he was put into solitary confinement for months. Months. In total darkness and isolation. Just imagine that. Literally months in darkness, in solitary confinement. That would take its toll on anybody. So in August 1944, Harry and 36 other British, French and Belgian agents were then transported to Saarbrücken and then on to Buchenwald, which was the extermination camp. 16 anti-Nazis were executed just a few weeks later in Buchenwald, but Harry managed to escape that same fate. Funnily enough, it was while he was in the concentration camp, in the extermination camp, I should say, that Harry found his inner strength again after having been tortured. He plotted a conspiracy with the SS doctor Erwin Dingschuler and with two other prisoners, Eugen Kogon and Arthur Deitch. So the plan was to escape. They used fictitious identities and switched barracks alongside a Frenchman named Stéphane Hessel, and Peleuve hid under the name of Marcel Seigneur. I love that name, Marcel Seigneur. Can't catch me, I am Marcel Seigneur. So using this fake identity, Harry managed to be transferred to another camp. He was transferred to the Schönebeck camp. I know there's a lot of camps, there's a lot of names. Let's just go with it. He was transferred to Schönebeck camp where he had to collaborate with the manufacture of aeroplanes, but he worked in sabotaging Nazi weapons. Get him from the inside, guy. That's my boy. So Harry was there making these planes, making these weapons, secretly undermining them right under the Nazis' noses. They didn't even know who he was. Until one day, someone noticed that he was doing this. They caught him red-handed in the act. And my poor old Harry, he was sent off to a punishment platoon where he had to build trenches in near freezing winter conditions. He was freezing his balls off. And of course, all under the watchful, not so caring eye of the Nazi guards. Of course, that's the last thing you need, isn't it? When you're already freezing your nipples off, having to build a bloody trench for the Nazis, and then you've got these bloody Jobsworths breathing down your neck. Do it faster. One way or another, God bless this man, in 1945, Harry Peleuve managed to escape from the camp. He fled to the American vanguard where they had their line, their camp. But before, I don't know why, it's not funny, I'm not laughing about it. It just seems like it's made up, but this is actually real. So just as he was about to find his freedom, he was arrested yet again by SS officers. So close and yet so far. He was so close he could taste it, but the bloody SS got him again. God knows how, but he managed to seize their weapons and immobilized his captors, and then took them to the US troops and handed them over to the US troops. I mean, can you think of this is a man. This is a man. I'm like, Harry, do you have a grandson? Bring him over here. So after the war, Harry reached the rank of Major. He was recognised as being a very valiant officer, and he was decorated with lots of different medals, including the Order of Distinguished Service, the Croix de Guerre, the War Cross. He was ordered the Medal of Resistance, and he was appointed Knight of the Legion of Honour. In the UK, he was also recognised by the Order of the Knights of the British Empire. So he was Sir Harry Peleuve, not to be sniffed at. He was awarded the highest honours for his courage, tenacity, and spirit of resistance in the face of death and betrayal. For those who know of Harry Peleuve, he's widely recognised as being one of the most significant war heroes, war spies from the Second World War. The writer Nigel Perrin published a book in 2009 called The Spirit of Resistance, and there's even a Netflix documentary being made which focuses on the life and adventures of Harry Peleuve. After the war, as he was being awarded all of these medals and these honours, he left military life, he stepped back from it, retired, and he was actually sent to work for Shell in South America, and he was sent off to work around the Caribbean. So a nice compensation for all of that stress he's had to go through. He gets to go and live and work in the Caribbean. I mean, I wouldn't sniff at it. In 1952, he was assigned to Tunisia, and it was there that he married a Danish woman named Marie-Louise Jeanne, with whom he had 2 children named Madeleine and Jean-Pierre. Unfortunately, the marriage was not to last. Apparently, they argued quite a lot. And also, I feel like Harry was still quite traumatised, understandably, for everything that he'd been through in the war, with the torture, the interrogation, the extermination camps. I mean, who wouldn't be traumatised? And I think it had an impact on his marriage. It took a toll. And so they eventually divorced in 1956. So they were just married for 4 years. It's not a long time at all. Sadly, Harry died fairly young. He died at the age of 47 while he was staying here in Sevilla in the famous Hotel Alfonso XIII. So he died at 11 o'clock on March the 19th, 1963. And that was the end of it. So he was buried here in Sevilla in the English cemetery of St. George, San Jorge. And he was given quite a humble tomb considering the amazing work he'd put in World War II. Yeah, that's just how it was for Harry. So I guess at this point we just have a few unresolved questions. Obviously, this man was very important to the British and the French resistance. He wasn't just any old soldier. I mean, that sounds bad. No soldier is any old soldier, but you know what I mean. Like he was fundamental to undermining the Nazis, and he had dos cojones. Like he was a proper hero. So first of all, why has he been given such, I don't know, it's kind of like a meager burial site. If you consider the usual treatment that war heroes are given, if they've given an outstanding contribution to the war effort, they're usually afforded a much more extravagant tomb that's much more dignified, especially if he's a hero in both Britain and France. Why has he just been given this little corner of a cemetery with a headstone that really wasn't the most expensive material? They didn't really put a great deal of thought and effort into his headstone or where he was buried. And also, why was he here in the first place in Sevilla? That's another question. He was staying in Alfonso XIII, which is a very famous and one of the most, if not the most expensive hotel in Sevilla. So where was he getting that money to stay in a hotel like that, and why? Like, who was paying for him to stay there? It must be noted as well that the Hotel of Alfonso XIII is one of the favourite hotels for spies to stay in. It's not just Harry Peleuve. So it's a hotel that's famously been frequented by spies during and after World War II. So some of the other notable names that have stayed there were Somerset Maugham, who worked for the British MI6, and Ernest Hemingway, who worked for the American OSS. The fact that Harry Peleuve died in Alfonso XIII and that he was staying there is kind of suspicious, if you ask me. Like, I don't think it was by accident that he was staying there, but that begs the question, why was he here? What was he doing? Who was paying for him to stay here? What was his mission? The circumstances surrounding his death, some people believe, are quite suspicious as well. So the coroner's report said it was thrombosis. So that's on the death certificate. It says that his death was caused by a thrombosis. But there are other people who say, isn't it a little bit convenient that he died so suddenly whilst he was far away from his homes in England, France, South America, the Caribbean, and North Africa? Like, why was it only when he was outside of his comfort zone that he was snatched up? His death certificate as well, there had to be a mandatory contact. You would assume that that would be someone that he knew, that would be a trusted confidant, a friend, somebody that he knew in Sevilla. But the person that appears on his death certificate is called Rafael Rodriguez Diaz, a man who lived on Calle Amor de Dios. And it's considered to be quite suspicious because there doesn't seem to be that much of a connection between them. Also, on the death certificate, his marriage status is put there as married, and he was not married at this point in time. He was already divorced. He got divorced in 1956 and he died in 1963. Also, the birthplace that they put on his death certificate is incorrect. So they've named his birthplace as Worthing, but we know that he was born in Hastings near Sussex. Now, you could say this is all just incompetence, maybe it's just, they've botched his death certificate, but then that also leads you to ask the question, well, if they got his marriage status wrong, they got his birthplace wrong, they've got this random guy from Calle Amor de Dios who doesn't seem to have any link to him on the death certificate, then how do we know that the cause of death was correct? So, I don't know, just speculation, but it has been said that perhaps he was here on business doing something that people weren't too happy about. It's also kind of fishy that his body wasn't sent back to the United Kingdom or to France after he died. Why was he buried here? I think I actually went to the English cemetery, and one of the people that looks after the cemetery was saying that his family, and I don't say this on any authority because I don't know his family, I don't know anything about his family. This is just all second-hand information at this point. Harry Peleuve's family were offered the option to have his body transferred to the United Kingdom and to be buried there, and that it was them who said they didn't want that. So why that would be the case, I don't know. I mean, even if you're from a divorced family, I mean, it's still normal to want to have your family members in your country, right? So who knows, maybe there's something more going on there. One thing that we do know is that spies never really retire. Once a spy, always a spy. Maybe he was getting sucked into some more missions. And another thing that we also know is that if it weren't for Los Ángeles de la Ciudad, who are looking after the cemetery of St. George, where Harry is buried, then we possibly wouldn't know that Harry was even there, which is just insane, because his tomb was so overgrown, it was so consumed by brambles and weeds, that he was just completely neglected and overlooked. Almost like when he was in solitary confinement and completely isolated and in the dark. Do you think that's the sort of end that a man like Harry Peleuve deserves? I certainly don't. Maybe we'll learn more as time goes on. If there was espionage going on, then maybe it's too soon to know about it. But I just think this dude, he just deserves so much more than to be shoved into a corner of an English cemetery that's crumbling around him. He deserves more, and so does everybody else that's buried in that cemetery. I mean, it's just in complete tatters. And there are some really influential and important people buried there. I feel like I'm just constantly saying this all the time, but I just can't get over it. I've never seen a cemetery like it in my life. Like, I've gone to cemeteries where there are paupers that are buried there, and they have a more dignified grave than a lot of these people who were important and influential to the upbuilding of Andalusia in the 19th century and have contributed so much. And people like Harry Peleuve, who is a bloody legend, they're just in a cemetery that's absolutely collapsing, and there's not a lot I can do about it except just talk about it. So here I am. Like, if any of you can do something about it, please do. Anyway, so if you liked this video, please do like and subscribe, and I'll be back very soon with another story for you. So have a lovely day, have a lovely week ahead. See you very soon. Ciao, bye-bye. Hasta luego. Oh, handsome Harry.